The first time I heard the footsteps, I was alone in my apartment on County Road 17, just outside of Harlan Creek, Ohio. It was late October, the kind of cold that settles into your bones before you even realize you're shivering. The power had flickered twice that evening, a common enough occurrence in our part of the Rust Belt where the infrastructure feels as worn as the denim in my closet. I was grading papers at my kitchen table, a stack of freshman essays on regional folklore, when I heard it. Not from the hallway. Not from the floor above. It was inside the walls, a slow, deliberate tread, like someone pacing in a room that shouldn't exist. I stopped breathing. The sound moved from the living room wall to the bedroom wall, a soft, rhythmic pressure against the plaster. I told myself it was the old pipes, the house settling, the wind finding a new gap in the siding. Rational explanations are a comfort, a blanket you pull over your head when the dark feels too specific. I finished my coffee, marked the last paper, and went to bed. The footsteps stopped the moment I turned off the lamp. My name is Elena. I teach English at the community college, a job I love for its quiet predictability. Harlan Creek is the kind of place people drive through without noticing. We have a single stoplight, a post office that closes at noon on Saturdays, and a Waffle House on the interstate exit that smells perpetually of grease and hope. I moved here 5 years ago for the low rent and the silence. I believed in cause and effect. In the tangible world, the footsteps were an anomaly, a glitch in my understanding. I mentioned it to my neighbor, Marcus, over the fence the next weekend while we were both raking leaves. He's a retired mechanic, hands permanently etched with grease, a man who trusts what he can fix with a wrench. He listened, nodded slowly, and said, "Old houses talk, Elena. Mine does the same. Sounds like a marble rolling across the floorboards every full moon, just the wood contracting." His explanation was kind, practical. It helped, for about a day. The second time, the sound had a texture. It was a Thursday, just after dusk. I was taking out the recycling, the blue bin scraping against the concrete path. The air smelled, and then, underneath the distant hum of a truck on State Route 7, I heard it again. Not inside this time. Outside, on the gravel shoulder of the road. A slow, measured crunch of footsteps, keeping pace with me as I walked back to my door. I froze. The bag in my hand. The sound stopped. I waited, my heart a frantic bird against my ribs. Nothing but the sigh of the wind through the bare maple in my yard. I convinced it was too human, too deliberate. That night, I started keeping a log. Not a dramatic, horror, movie journal. Just a notepad by my bed. Date, time, description. October 23rd, 7:14 p.m. Footsteps on gravel, east to west. Duration, approximately 12 seconds. It felt clinical, a way to impose order. The act of writing it down, that was my mistake. Studying it gave it a framework. It gave it permission to continue. A week later, I heard it at work. The college library is a modern, quiet building of glass and steel, a stark contrast to the decaying Victorian I rented. I was reshelving books in the stacks, the silence broken only by the soft whir of the HVAC system. And then, from the far end of the aisle, between the 800s and the 900s, a footstep, a soft scuff on the industrial. I peered around the corner. Empty. Just rows of books, their spines like silent sentinels. I walked to the end of the aisle. Nothing. But the feeling of being observed, of a presence just beyond my peripheral vision, was a physical weight on my shoulders. I left work early that day, a first for me. The rationalizations were wearing thin, fraying at the edges like an old rope. It wasn't the house, it wasn't the wind. The isolation began subtly. I started declining Marcus's invitations for coffee. I stopped answering calls from my sister in Columbus. The sound became my secret. a shameful thing I couldn't explain without sounding unhinged. Who would believe me? A community college professor haunted by footsteps. I'd be met with polite concern. The logbook grew. October 30th, 2:03 a.m. Footsteps in hallway, outside bedroom door. 7 distinct steps. Pause. Then retreat. November 1st, 5:47 p.m. Sound of slow pacing in kitchen while making dinner. Stopped when I spoke aloud. Each entry was a brick in a wall I was built. The way my cat, Jasper, would sometimes stare intently at a blank corner of the room, ears swiveled forward. The faint, metallic smell that would occasionally appear in a room, like old pennies, then vanish. The temperature in my apartment became inconsistent, a pocket of cold air in the middle of a heated room. These weren't dramatic events, they were whispers, adjustments to a reality that was slowly tilting on its axis. The first real escalation happened on a Tuesday. I had a department meeting that ran late, and I left the campus under a sky bruised purple with twilight. The drive home is usually 10 minutes of quiet country road, lined with skeletal cornfields. That night, a thick fog had rolled in off the hills, reducing visibility to a few feet. I was driving slowly, my eyes straining against and then I saw it. In my rearview mirror, for just a second, the faint impression of a figure standing in the middle of the road behind me. Not running, not waving, just standing. I jerked my head to look through the back window. Nothing but swirling fog. My hands were tight on the wheel. I drove faster, my breath coming in short clouds in the cold When I pulled into my driveway, the relief was so profound. It felt like nausea. I sat in the car for a full minute, engine idling, before I could force myself to get out. That night, the footsteps weren't in the walls. They were on my porch. Slow, heavy creaks of the old wooden boards, right outside my front door. 1 step, 2, a pause. Then the sound of a slow, deliberate exhale against the wood of the door. I didn't move. I sat on my bed. The sound lasted maybe 30 seconds, then silence. I didn't sleep. I watched the door until the gray light of dawn bled through the curtains. That's when I started looking for patterns, for a source. If this was attached to me, maybe it had a history. I began researching the property, the land. My house was built in the 1920s, but the land itself had an older story. Through county records online and a conversation with the elderly woman at the Historical Society, a woman in the late 1800s, the land was part of a larger farm owned by a man named Silas Croft. Records were sparse, but there was a mention of a domestic incident in 1898, a wife named Eleanor, who met with an unfortunate end. The language was euphemistic, bureaucratic, no details, just a name, a date, and a silence that felt louder than any scream. Eleanor, the footsteps. Was that her? A woman pacing, waiting, trapped not in a house, but in the memory of the land itself. The idea was absurd, unscientific, and yet it fit the pattern of my dread. It wasn't random malice. It was a specific, unresolved sorrow. Sharing this with Marcus was a turning point. I didn't tell him about the figure in the fog or the breath at the door. I just showed him the historical snippet, mentioned the persistent noises. He was quiet for a long time, looking out at his own tidy yard. My granddaddy told stories, said the hills hold on to things. Not ghosts, not exactly, more like echoes, strong emotions, violent moments. They can leave a mark on a place, like a stain. He wasn't dismissing me. He was offering a different framework, one rooted in the local lore I'd been too academic to consider. He agreed to come over one evening. to just sit with me. The solidarity. They started in the kitchen. Marcus's eyes met mine. He heard it. His face, usually so placid, tightened. He stood up, slowly, and walked toward the kitchen doorway. "Hello," he said, his voice steady but firm. The footsteps stopped, absolute silence. Then, from the hallway behind me, a single, clear footstep. Marcus turned, but the hallway was empty. He didn't say anything, he just sat back down. He stayed until sunrise. We didn't talk much. Word, in a small town, travels through quiet channels. Maya, who works at the post office and knows everyone's business, mentioned to me that her brother, Derek, who drives a delivery truck on the back roads, had been hearing strange things near the old Croft farmstead, the ruins of which were just a mile from my house. He described a feeling of being watched, and sometimes the sound of walking on gravel when no one was there. Then there was James, the county surveyor, who told me he'd found odd, localized magnetic anomalies on some old plots near my street. He was a man of data, and the data didn't make sense. We weren't a group of believers seeking a haunting. We were a collection of practical people, each encountering a persistent, inexplicable glitch in our reality. Our meetings became informal, held in Marcus's garage or my kitchen over coffee. We shared logs, compared notes. The phenomenon seemed tied to the old Croft land, but its reach was extending, like a ripple in a pond, and it was escalating. Derek reported his truck's engine cutting out on a deserted road, only to restart when he spoke Eleanor's name aloud, a detail he'd heard from me. James's surveying equipment would malfunction in specific spots, displaying error messages that seemed almost linguistic. The thing wasn't just making noise, it was communicating, or trying to. The decision to go to the source wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet, grim consensus. We couldn't live like this, in a state of low-grade siege. If this was an echo of Eleanor Croft, maybe understanding her story could quiet it. Maybe it just wanted to be heard. We planned to visit the ruins of the Croft farmhouse on a Saturday afternoon, in full daylight, with our phones charged and a clear plan. Just 4 of us. Me, Marcus, Maya, and James. Rationality was our armor. The ruins were exactly that. A foundation of crumbling stone, a collapsed chimney, and the ghost of a cellar hole swallowed by blackberry brambles. The air was still, cold for November. We stood there, the normalcy of the afternoon. Then James's digital recorder, which he'd turned on just in case, emitted a burst of static, not random. It had a rhythm, a slow, pulsing beat, and underneath it, if you strained, a faint, whispering quality. We all heard it. The color drained from Maya's face. Marcus put a steadying hand on my shoulder. The sound wasn't coming from the recorder's speaker. It seemed to be coming from the ground beneath our feet, from the cellar hall. It was the footsteps, but amplified, layered, as if dozens of people were pacing in that buried space. We just stood there, listening, as the sound built in intensity. It wasn't threatening. It was desperate. A frantic, endless pacing, and then, clear as a bell in my own mind, not my ears, a thought that wasn't mine. He said I was waiting. He said I was always waiting. It was a woman's voice, frayed with time and sorrow. It was a memory of profound injustice, trapped in a loop. The historical record said, "Unfortunate end." The echo in the land whispered of betrayal, of being buried not just in the earth, but in silence. The footsteps were her vigil, her endless, unanswered wait. The confrontation wasn't with a specter, but with the truth. We weren't being haunted. We were being witnessed by a witness who had never been. We left the ruins as the afternoon light began to fade. No one spoke until we were back in my living room. The familiar walls a comfort. The plan that emerged was not one of exorcism, but of acknowledgement. We couldn't change the past, but maybe we could break the loop. James suggested a formal, historical marker, not a sensational one, but a simple, factual stone that stated Eleanor Croft's name, her dates if they could be found, and the truth of her death. However vague the records were, Maya would navigate the county bureaucracy. I would write the proposal, the historical summary. It felt like the only ethical response. We were not ghost hunters. We were neighbors, trying to mend a tear in the fabric of our shared place. The work took weeks. The county process was slow, mired in paperwork and committees. During that time, the footsteps in my house changed. They became less. I began to respond, quietly, aloud. I hear you, Eleanor. Or, we're trying. It felt less like appeasement and more like conversation. The cold spots grew less severe. The metallic smell faded. The phenomenon wasn't gone, but its energy was shifting from frantic pace. The day the historical marker was installed was a gray, drizzly Tuesday. A small group of us stood by the overgrown foundation as Marcus set the simple, sandblasted granite stone into a bed of concrete. It read, "In memory of Eleanor Croft, 1865 to 1898. Her story is part of this land." We didn't hold a ceremony. That night, for the first time in months, my apartment was completely silent. No footsteps, no cold spots, just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sigh of the wind. I slept deeply, dreamlessly. The aftermath wasn't a return to normal. Normal was gone. What settled in its place was a different kind of quiet, one filled with awareness. I still live in the old house, I still teach, but I understand now that places hold memory, that history isn't just in books, but in the very soil and timber. The fear has transformed into a solemn respect. Sometimes, I'll acknowledge it softly, and then go about my business. It's a reminder, not a threat. Marcus checks in more often. Maya brings me mail that's been misdelivered to her route. And we chat about town gossip. James sent me a copy of the final survey report, with a note that the magnetic anomalies near my street have normalized. We are a small, unofficial network, bound by a shared, quiet understanding. We don't talk about it much. We don't need to. I sometimes think about the nature of echoes. They aren't the original sound. They are a distortion, a fading repetition shaped by the landscape they travel through. Eleanor's echo was shaped by violence, by silence, by 100 years of being unheard. Our response, this small, factual stone, was a different kind of landscape. It didn't erase the echo, it gave it a new surface to reflect against. One of acknowledgement rather than neglect. The footsteps may never fully stop, but perhaps they no longer need to pace in desperation. Perhaps they can just be a footstep, a memory of movement, a part of the land's quiet, complex song. If you live in a place with old walls or walk land that has known sorrow, listen, not with fear, but with attention. The past isn't always gone. Sometimes, it's just waiting for someone to finally hear the story it's been telling all along. And if you ever find yourself hearing a sound that doesn't seem to have a source, a rhythm that feels too deliberate for the wind, don't just rationalize it away. But you might, just might, help turn a haunting into a history. And in that act, you reclaim not just the past, but your own peace in the present. The world continues. Of course, the seasons turn, the bills arrive, the leaves fall and are raked. But some silences are different after you've learned to listen to what they contain.